Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our daily word. Today's Wednesday, June 23rd of the year 2020. So glad you could join me for our few minutes together. As you can tell, I'm still at the lake in my camper. I'm finishing. Well, I don't know about my last cup of coffee, but sharing in a cup of coffee as we begin our time together. Today is It's a beautiful day. A little windy here, but it's a beautiful day today. So glad you could join me for a few minutes together for our daily word and our conversation about Scripture. So this morning's Scripture is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 30, verses 19 through 22. And this particular Scripture is Isaiah prophesying over the remnant of the people of Israel. And Isaiah tells them that God will be with them, that God is with them, that God will be with them, that God has been with them, and that the leaders of their tribe have been empowered, and that wherever they go, they should go with courage and character, knowing that God is with them. So we hear these few verses in the midst of this. Truly, people of Zion, inhabitants of Jerusalem, you shall weep no more. He will surely be gracious to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears it, he will answer you. Though the Lord may give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teacher will not hide himself any more, but your eyes shall be your teacher. And when you turn to the right, or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, This is the way, walk in it. Then you will defile your silver covered idols and your gold plated images. You will scatter them like filthy rags. You will say to them, Away with you. So this is this interesting piece of the history that Isaiah preaches to the people of Israel about where God would lead them. Now, if you're like me, I often really like to know where it is that I'm going. I like to have a destination in mind, and things kind of laid out, if you will. So sometimes if you're like me, you get bogged down in the logistics of life. Where should we go? What should we do? And those are important questions, right? We like to plan for the future. We like to know where it is that we're going. I've been working this morning on scheduling some events, outdoor worship on July 4th, a back to school VBS kind of party on August 14th. We're going to do outdoor worship again on August 15th, I believe. Um, Scheduling those kind of things, my summer in the Psalms, I like to get those events planned, and I like to get them on the calendar and get those things scheduled because I like to know where I'm going. I like to have those things in mind. And then, what I'm doing specifically is going to August 15th on my calendar and going backwards. Because August 16th on a Monday, I'm having surgery. And so I'm going to be laid up for a little while. So I'm going backwards. And so between today, June 23rd, and August 15th, which is a Sunday, I have all these ideas and I want to have the logistics planned out and I want to know where I'm going in life. But the problem, I think, for some of us, and for me included, is that we get caught up in the idea of where we're going, and we don't make way for God's voice to speak to us. We don't make way for God to guide us. And we think that the only way to live our life is to have a sure and certain path in the way we ought to go. Isaiah, who is prophesying over this remnant of the people of Israel, reminds them, that God has always been with them, that God will be with them in the future, and that there's this extraordinary truth that Isaiah gives to them. No matter where you go, God, the presence of God is transcendent in their life. We often have this, we see these things that people post that um, prayer was taken out of schools, or God isn't welcome in certain places. And if you're like me, I believe in the transcendent and omnipresent power of God. That God doesn't leave schools, God doesn't leave government buildings, God doesn't leave places like the Supreme Court or whatever it is you want to talk about. God, Isaiah says, is transcendent. Wherever we are, God is present with us. Whether I'm in my office in the church, or whether we're in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, or like we'll be outside on July 4th, whether I'm here in the camper doing some work, whether I'm sitting outside by the fire like I was last night, whether I'm whether we're driving in our car, God is transcendent. So Isaiah says, wherever you walk, whatever you do it with courage and character. Now, it's true that in life we have the choice between, good choices and bad choices. And we know in our life there's some things we ought to avoid. But I think in our life too, there is this array of choices between two good choices. We can go left or we can go right, and they're not bad choices. It's just a matter of us choosing which way we ought to go. And I think that happens to us more than we realize. God doesn't place God's will over one of those or the other. God's plan for us, God's hope for us, even I think God's will for us is that we would choose the direction we're going to go and then walk in it faithfully. And I wonder sometimes if we've missed the boat on that call because we're so worried about making the exact right decision, that we miss the opportunity to be faithful. We miss the opportunity to do what it is that God calls us to do. Isn't that interesting? We sometimes make an idol out of the right choices because we think we're making the right choices that will lead us to peace and love and hope and joy. It's out of order, I think, sometimes. When we decide instead to be people of peace, to be people of joy, to be people of love, I think we find sometimes that then the choices we make, because that's who we are, things work out for the good and we live out our truths. So, wherever we go, whatever we decide, whether we go right or left, as the scripture says to us, God is present with us, even in the midst of bad choices that we make. Finding the right way in our life isn't a matter of logistics or direction or following a map necessarily, but it's a matter, I think, of recognizing that God is present with us. When we acknowledge God, when we worship God, when we follow God's guidelines in our lives, when we choose to love God and love our neighbor, it isn't about where we go, but it's about trusting in God to go with us along the way. And I think sometimes in our lives we get caught up in striving for that exact right answer when I think God calls us to something greater than what all of that means. Hear what the scripture says. When you turn to the right or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." And so, in planning events for the future and working on those this morning, I felt good about what that meant. And although I waffled a bit, should I do this? Should I do that? Should we plan this? Should we plan that? I, I got all that done. I thought, it is what God's calling me to, and is where God's leading me to do this in this certain way. And when I go from August 15th and go backwards and plan these things, and now I'm working on July worship and planning what those things are going to look like. And rather than worrying about getting that exactly perfect, which I sometimes struggle with, I'm reminded that wherever I go, whatever I decide, whatever it is that God leads me to, God is always with me. And I think sometimes, if you're like me, I don't hear the words This is the way, walk in it, because I'm too concerned whether I've made the right choice or not. I think about that in relation to, I thought about that this morning, well, in relation to mission trip. When we went on our first mission trip, some 8 years ago, I wanted to convince people to go, and so I twisted some arms and said, "Look, I think it was six other arms," and I said, "Look, let's go. Let's go to Deer Lodge, and if you hate it, I'll never say the word mission trip ever again. If you hate it." Now I knew folks weren't going to hate it, of course, and it was unknown. I've never been to Deer Lodge before. I didn't know what we were setting ourselves up for. I just knew that mission trip. So I didn't know if it was perfect. I just trusted that God was guiding. And so we went left, we went right, we weaved our way up the mountain, and we found there, because we chose, just knowing God would go with us, what we found there was this amazing community of people that we're now fully engaged with in our lives. We didn't go this summer, because of me and my physical abilities, but we're gearing up for next summer to make that happen, and hopefully I'm going to feel better. But you see, the first time we went blind, we went unknowing. We had no clue where Deer Lodge, Tennessee was, and we had actually took the long way, the way the GPS took us, and we ended up on the outside of town, which took us probably a half hour longer to get there. Once we had been there, we found the shortcut up and down the mountain that took us to Sunbright. Whether we went left or whether we went right wasn't important. What was important was that this was the way, and we walk in it. Summer has a unique way of taking us places and guiding us in our lives. I just trust that, we'll know that God is with us wherever we go and whatever we do, whatever challenges we're faced. And we can go left or we can go right, but God is transcendent. God is always there in our presence. And I think that is an amazing thing for us to realize, that God is transcendent, is always with us in our journey. And, for me, that's a good reminder. And I hope it is for you that God is just with us and says to us again and again, this is the way, this is the way. We might have adversity, as the scripture says. We might have affliction, but God won't hide God's self, the scripture says. God will be with us. We'll be able to see God, the teacher, and we'll be able to hear when God responds to us. I just know that in our lives and the struggles that we have and all the things that challenge us, isn't it good to know that God's transcendent, that God is with us no matter which direction we choose to take. So I hope that's a good word for you today. I hope that's a reminder of God's presence with all of us in all of our lives. And I hope that's a word for us that we can just know that God hears us and we hear God, and God's transcendent in all of our lives. So pray you have a great day. I pray this has been a good word for you as it has been for me, and that we could live our lives knowing and trusting in God's presence. And so my Aunt Joe's watching this morning, and today is Aunt Joe's birthday. I won't say how old you are, Aunt Joe, but happy birthday to my Aunt Joe. So have a great day. Know of God's love and grace and mercy in your lives. Know of peace and joy. Know of God's love and my love for all of you. And I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day, my friends.